So, you're sick of losing, are you? Feel like you just can't keep up? Never fear, this video is for you. In truth, this is a video I've wanted to make for a while. Cataloging some common criticism I've lobbied at some of the player base over this time, and give some advice for how you can improve to start playing at the highest level in the Arakai TCG. But, where to start? Well, in the deck, of course. You're only as good as the cards you choose to play. So let's head right into tip number 1. But if you're not interested in tip number 1, I'll have time codes down below so you can skip to whichever chapter of the video you like if you feel like you only need one bit of advice or two. So, if not, I'll see you into whichever chapter you skip to, but for everyone else, let's get right in with chapter 1. Why are you playing your deck? This might sound like a harsh thing to say, but it's true. The very first tip to give is just to ask a question. The question of why. It's something I asked myself whenever I try out a new deck. Why am I playing this? What does this deck do for me that other decks do not? What is unique that will give me the winning advantage? As many of you know, I am a Shaman stan. It's my favorite deck, and not just for nostalgia. I play Shaman because it has a versatile toolbox of effects, and it's in Primal, the only nation to interact with the spirit mechanic in any meaningful way, giving me a wider access to resources that other decks just simply do not. This logic extends to individual cards as well. Don't just add cards to your deck that seem good. Ask yourself, what does this card provide me? When do I want to draw this card? Is this card the best option for the role it serves? Asking yourself some simple questions at the deck building level will make you think more critically about your card choices. Maybe that ally is just generically useful in its level slot. Maybe that spell gives you a versatile piece of removal that your deck just lacks. Or maybe you just like it. Whatever the reason may be, knowing that information can help you to improve. If your deck is full of removal, maybe reconsidering adding that removal spell would be a good idea. If you're lacking level 3s for curve, maybe consider rebalancing some of your levels or looking outside of your theme. There could be better options for important level ratios. Critical thinking of your deck will lead to better deck building decisions, and thus to better decks overall. But what does a good deck look like? I talked about this at length in my Should You Go First or Second video, but to reiterate, for the love of God, build your decks to curve. For those who haven't seen that video, building to curve means building your deck to have higher amounts of lower level allies and lower amounts of higher level allies, allowing you to put out fresh boards of allies every turn as your spirit count grows higher and higher. What this typically looks like is 8 to 9 level 3s, 6 to 9 level 2s, and 9 level 1s. This can vary depending on what deck you're playing and what cards you have access to in your theme. Armored Dragon, for instance, lacks like any meaningful level 3s, they play the vanilla for Christ's sake, but compensates for that by having lots of level 2s that can easily reach level 3 stats. And sometimes you might have to reach outside your theme for meaningful levels, such as Giant Insect having only a singular level 1 to its theme. They will probably need cards like Meditating Trainee or Faunus to augment their curve. I cannot reiterate how important this is, but I think I've dwelled on this for too long already. Just remember to focus on those low-level allies in your building, and you're guaranteed to see more success as you'll be able to continuously churn out boards, especially against players who do use curve. Arakai is a resource game. Some decks generate resources better than others. But regardless of what you play, allies I find are more valuable than spells on a fundamental level. That's not to say spells are worthless, but allies are vital to actually winning the game. Every ally inherently generates you a resource when it destroys another ally and does damage in the process. This, alongside any effects to generate resources, such as drawing, unexpend, or life gain, add to their value. Compared to that to a removal spell, which is just a 1-for-1 trade on average, that deals no damage. On their own, removal spells' best use is just clearing an ally after battle, or helping you clear things that you couldn't otherwise do. The same goes for consistency cards. Spells like Deep Sea Exploration or Chanting are often questionable choices. Well, how can this be? Cards like Pot of Duality and Yu-Gi-Oh! Saw massive success, and these have no restrictions, not even a nation clause like the draw spells. Well, it's because they expend more, taking away a valuable resource to go 1-for-1 in card economy. But inversely, cards like Mina Deer Extraordinaire are considered insanely good, despite not being nearly as generic, and that's because for the same cost, you get an add off of a body that can help you win the game, as opposed to just a spell that traded itself for another card. It's all about that ally status. Allies are the lifeblood of Arakai, and the simple act of having a good effect on an ally makes them just inherently better. This combined with considering stats, it's not bizarre to see most Arakai decks consisting mostly of allies. The few exceptions to this are decks like Tomes, which require vast amounts of auras, but get payoffs for those less advantageous cards. Things like Hera, for instance, being amazing removal on a level 4, that only works with the high aura gimmick. Or things like Angels, who need lots of spells but have quite a versatile toolbox and their allies to compensate. Other than that, most decks you see often will have double their ally to spell count. I've seen a lot of decks with 30 allies to 15 spells, and it's a pretty common ratio. With a spell, you have just what's written on the card. But with an ally, you have that, and an attacker, and a blocker, and a resource. Keep this in mind when building your decks, and ask yourself, is this spell really better than another ally? Is this spell fulfilling a role that an ally can't? And furthermore, do you have too many spells clogging up your hands, causing you to lose turn? Consider these questions when building your decks, and you'll see some notable success. In Arakai, it is easy to get cocky in a winning position. You can win the ally race, get some ramp, or just get a large amount of cards and feel like you're on cloud 9. But then you start overcommitting. Suddenly you're losing. That advantage you had is dwindling, and your opponent isn't as out of the game as you thought. Take my round 3 tournament match in this current league. I was piloting a deck known as Celestial Mill, designed to stall the game with the new Victoros Evo and mill the opponent to death. After taking Game 1, I had a less than stellar start to Game 2. But my opponent on Armor Dragon managed to clog their board with 3 essentially useless allies, whose combined stats did not kill Victoros. So I dropped the boy and passed with my Tsunami Aura, and there was nothing he could do in this position. I, for all intents and purposes, was winning, and maybe I would have. However, my arrogance got the best of me. And I, on the following turn, seeing him doing nothing, embodied the clueless emoji and invoked a Striding Sentry, just because I thought I could. Not to do anything, but just beat draw power. If he kills it for some resources, I'll get a draw, I thought. This was a fatal mistake. For you see, by doing this, I increased the total number of level of allies I controlled from a meaningless 5 to a dangerous 8. Victoros, as a boss monster, has targeting protection, and makes it so I heal whenever I take damage, and he just makes it so I can't lose the game on a perma. You know what it doesn't have? Effect protection. Yeah, my opponent swapped down Clear Destruction, which is just a board wipe that does not target, all because I got greedy and committed a guy when I didn't have to. Clear Destruction, notably, can only be cast if the opponent has levels 8 or higher on their board, which I put out there due to my hubris. I lost that game, and subsequently the match. If only I had this video to know when to hold him. My rule of thumb is, if I don't have to play a card to gain a meaningful advantage, I probably should. Being overly willing to do things like use blockers or just play dies for no reason can leave you dwindling on resources, or in my case, straight up lose you what would have been a one game. Before you play that card, ask yourself, what is it doing for me? Is it generating an advantage? How about advancing my game state? My win condition? If that card has little meaning to you at that moment, consider not playing it. Just because you can slap down a card doesn't mean you always should. It's very common I'll see people play an extra ally just to do nothing with it, and then have it just die. Think of your cards as investments. You are investing spirit, resources, and possibly spend to play that card. Don't make a bad investment by just throwing it away. Make sure your cards pay off in some meaningful way, and you'll see your success rate multiply. In Arakai, if all of your opponent's allies are restrained, or they have none, you can attack your opponent's life directly for its level as damage. In the late game, this can be very dangerous, as players will commonly be at high spirit and low life, leaving them in what I call kill thresholds, which is basically just the opponent's spirit being greater than that player's life. If my opponent has 10 spirit and I'm at 7 life, I'm at a kill threshold, because they could just invoke 7 levels worth of dies, swing at my dome, and this is a normal part of the game that you should be wary of. This is not what I'm talking about in this section. What this section is talking about is early face gaming. A lot of people try to play quote-unquote aggro decks like Giant Insect or slower tempo decks like Chimera and try to just face game the entire time because that's what aggro does, or they'll attack the Beal anyway. This is a trap. Aggro decks in Arakai like Shaman or Giant Insect do not win by face gaming. They win by doing battle phase better than the opponent and more consistently, killing allies easier and more reliably, never running out and dwindling the opponent's resources. This is how aggro decks thrive, and inversely, decks like Chimera exploit their amazing resource generation while using stuff like Beelbutter to annoy the opponent since it's such an annoying ally to fight. So while they can't kill as many things the opponent has, the opponent has to subsequently ram their head into the wall of Beal to clear you over and over and over again. But not if you face game like a monkey and let them ramp. Suddenly your Beal isn't as impressive anymore, because you just let them ramp a bunch of stuff. Hope you have post fields. Don't get me wrong, attacking face is always an option, and leaving your opponent a weak 8k level 1 that used its resource effect and attacking face is something that I do myself quite often. But know when it's smart to face game, and don't just assume that's what my deck does. You will lose, it does not work, it is a bad idea. Trying to not play Arakai as intended almost never works. Ignoring things like curve and ally battling for face gaming or gimmicks will only net you losses. Arakai, like many things, is half won by mental state, and what deck you bring to the table can greatly influence it, regardless of your build, ratios, or anything of that nature. If I'm facing down Armored Dragon, I know my odds of running them out of allies are basically 0. I have to now adapt my strategy to exploit the weaknesses of Armored Dragon, that being their lack of face game ability due to their low levels, their looping of Charge Weaver, often leaving them vulnerable, and the fact that their hand is probably mostly allies, so things like Pulse Field and Removal are very limited to them. They also have no in-theme attack negation or combat trick. Rushed Rage is not real. They do have access to Flame Inheritance, but that's about it. Inversely, playing against something like Mill, I know I have to suddenly take my foot off the gas on consistency. Maybe those Village Sages are something to side out. Maybe I don't need to draw quite so much. And maybe Jasmine is more useful than Grand Summoner since she doesn't take a card out of my deck. Also, considering stopping your Spirit phase sooner. Do you really need 10 Spirit against a deck that goes this minus? Probably not. Maybe a more conservative 7 is reliable. Remember, every card you take out of your deck is one less the mill player has to work for. So maybe side out those Peep 5s and draw spells for a better chance. And change your mindset to adapt the matchup turn by turn. This can also work in your favor. If I'm playing Abyss, I'm always on at least one copy of Abyssal Grasp. This makes my opponents sweat and never want to attack my life points over my Abyss allies just by the card's existence. Just one mistake and boom, they're down huge tempo and removal, and they don't get that Spirit refunded item. It can be easy to overlook things like this, but consider the mind game of what you're playing and how you would feel facing your own deck across from you when selecting your deck and the cards you put into it, and how you would have to adapt. Apply this during your games, and I'm sure you'll see a difference. Combat tricks. They're such a niche part of the game, but by no means obsolete. It can be easy to write them off as Brits or Neds, but depending on your deck, they can serve vital to your win condition. I already talked about how Abyssal Grasp is a hell of a mind game for the opponent, but it's especially good in a deck like Chimera, who has an annoying ally to kill each and every turn, and your opponent might get frustrated and go all in, but uh-oh, they ignored Grasp, and oops, that's a dead level 5. It might be time for game 2. But that's not the only trick in the book. Facing down Astral or Haven gives these colors access to cards like LSI and Engage Emergency Power, powerful redirectors that can throw off your entire combat phase. Taking a moment to think about how you would use these spells in the opponent's board can save you a whole lot of headache. Slow down, it ain't a race. Then you have generic attack modulation like Venom Ambush or Flaming Inheritance, or even Acid Worm if you're splashing. In my experience, these cards work best in decks that have lots of allies that are below the normal threshold. For instance, Demon has 2 level 3s with 17k, and a level 4 with 22. Meaning with those level 3s, getting them run into by an 18k level 3 is a pretty no-brainer move, especially if it's a good one like Grand Summoner or Melina. These combat tricks can just outright screw your opponent big time, killing their ally on their turn and letting you ramp. But it's not just about the cheese. This small attack boost or reduction can be used offensively as well, to clear something that you might be just shy of, like a 26k level 5 killing a 27 for instance. It can mean the difference between having to support or not doing so, which often can be the choice between clearing their entire board or clearing just most of their board. A more thematic example is a card I've been playing recently. Unresting Spirit of the Beast, which boosts an ally by a whopping 8,000 power. Now that's cooking with gas, but it does shuffle back the ally after the fight. This might sound bad on paper, it's a neg 2 after all, and it even expends. But I've been side decking it in Shaman against Beelabukter, because my average level 3 is 17 to 18k power, and Beel is 23, meaning if he attacks any of my level 3s, or even something like a Pat Behemoth or a Jasmine, I can drop this spell to destroy Beel on his turn. Sure, they still get it back to hand, but now you have a whole battle phase to ignore Beel, and Abyssal Grasp ain't online with no Abyss allies, son, clearing the way for you to get a serious life lead. There's also generic attack negation. Temporal Hull, Perfect Defense, and Reliable Pulse Field are fantastic spells, especially if you can play multiple. The opponent seeing both Pulse Field and PD, for instance, allows them you to have any number up to 6 direct attack negators in your deck, mind gaming them into being unsure if it's ever safe to attack, or if they're just wasting their time. This, provided by aforementioned late game thresholds, can keep you alive for several turns you shouldn't have been allowed to, making them absolutely staple in the format as just mitigating major damage. This might sound obvious, but knowing more about the game's card pool is essential to getting better at the game. If you don't know what your opponent's doing, then you are at a disadvantage. I'm not saying go read every Arakai card ever made, but at least be knowledgeable about what people are doing and playing. I know I can't ever keep my mouth shut, I'm always yapping about what I'm cooking in the Discord. It's easy to see what I'm playing and read what I'm doing. That way you have an idea. Or maybe you hear a lot of a certain deck being played right now, or just got eroded to be stronger. It might break up some traction. Maybe give it a read to understand what you're getting into. Either with using the Master Search tab on the Discord or the Excel sheet pinned in the category, you can educate yourself before the match to get a read on how the opponent is performing, even without seeing their hand. If the opponent's plays are awkward and clumsy, maybe you can push your own envelope a little bit. Maybe their hand is bricked or they just don't have as much of the normal plays. And it's all because you took the time to read their cards ahead of time and know what they should be doing. Use this to your advantage. Read the damn cards. Well, that was a lot to take in. Worry not, I have timestamps down in the description for every chapter in this video if you missed anything or want to look back. I hope you learned something along the way. As usual, the link to the Discord TCG and the website will be in the description down below as well. I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.